Hi, I'm David Levine. I'm co-chair of SWINY. I'm here with Dr. Paul Offit, who is the director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And he's also the co-inventor of the rotavirus vaccine, Rototech, which is recommended for universal use in infants by CDC. He was recently honored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation for their launch of their foundation's Living Proof Project for Global Health. This is your second time with us, so I want to thank you.
Sure.
For people who have questions, I know some people submitted questions in advance, but if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. That's just for me and Dr. Offit, as well as my co-chair, Joe Bonner, who's behind the scenes producing this. So I wanted to start off just asking you about, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. It's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which kind of came up as a surprise this week. And they said that they're going to test more people than anybody else, and it'll be a one-dose vaccine. So what's the difference between that vaccine and Pfizer's and Moderna's?
Well, so Pfizer's and Moderna's vaccines are messenger RNA, which is to say it's just the messenger RNA that is essentially the gene that codes for the coronavirus spike protein. This vaccine is more similar to the UK vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine. The AstraZeneca vaccine is a replication defective simian adenovirus, meaning it's a simian adenovirus, so it doesn't cause disease in people. It's replication defective, meaning it can't reproduce itself, but it does contain the gene that codes for the, again, coronavirus spike protein. The Johnson & Johnson product is very similar to that. Instead of it being a simian adenovirus, it's a human adenovirus. So it's replication defective human adenovirus type 26. The advantage of that is twofold. One is that it looks that at least they're going to be testing it as a single dose vaccine, as compared to the UK's replication defective adenovirus, simian adenovirus, which is a 2-dose vaccine. And it's also, Ad26 is not commonly a human adenovirus that circulates in the community. So there shouldn't be any pre-existing immunity to that virus. So we'll see. I mean, again, we're just entering phase 3 trials, and we're not going to know anything until these phase 3 trials are completed.
Okay, so so this week, Dr. Fauci and the head of the CDC, they had to make a promise before the Senate saying they won't bow to any political pressure. What do you think of these things? Is that real? Is that real?
I hope so. I mean, I think what we have is, under normal circumstances, when the CDC, the NIH, and the Food and Drug Administration are allowed to do their jobs, we have a system in place that will protect the American public from products that are unsafe or ineffective. That's what the FDA does. And then when the FDA licenses a product, or in this case, approves it through emergency use authorization, then it goes to the ACIP, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, to the Centers for Disease Control, where they then recommend the product or don't recommend it. I mean, so the FDA licenses a product and says you can sell it. The ACIP says, here are the groups that you use it. And when it comes to vaccines, people always wait for the ACIP recommendation, even though it's licensed, or in this case approved, even though it could be sold, even though in this case it's probably going to be distributed for free, people still wait for the ACIP recommendation. What's happened is that we have had a loss of trust in the FDA, as evidenced by a couple things. One is that through an EUA, you had an approval of hydroxychloroquine, for which there was no evidence that it worked. And there was clear evidence that it could do harm. 10% of people that get hydroxychloroquine will develop heart arrhythmias. And so the sense was that this was being pushed by the administration because they wanted it, because they wanted a magic medicine that made this all go away. Since the administration was unwilling to sort of really do what many other countries have done regarding hygienic measures, meaning masking, social distancing, testing, contact tracing, since they were unwilling to do that, they just wanted this magic medicine that was going to make it all go away. And that at first was going to be hydroxychloroquine. Then, fast forward several weeks, and they wanted to push convalescent plasma. So convalescent plasma, or plasma from people who've already survived the infection, who presumably have antibodies in their circulation, and that was going to make it all go away. Now, before that, the administration exerted its will on the FDA for this. Both Tony Fauci and Francis Collins, director of the NIH, said, I don't think there's evidence that this works. But nonetheless, you had this press conference where Donald Trump called this a breakthrough, where Stephen Hahn, the commissioner of the FDA, and Alex Azar, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, got up there and said, this is going to be great. I mean, Dr. Hahn unfortunately said that 35 out of every 100 people will have their lives saved, which was clearly untrue. And to his credit, he got on national television the next day and said that wasn't true. And that in combination with the fact that both of them actually started their statements during that press conference with the same thing. They said the same thing, exactly the same thing. They both said, before I begin, I would like to thank President Trump for his strong leadership. So it just didn't give you the feeling that this was an independent moment. You know, the FDA, the fact of the matter is the FDA is part of the government. It's part of the executive branch. So is it influenceable by the executive branch? Apparently so. After they agreed to make convalescent plasma available basically through an EUA, so it didn't have to be tested anymore. Within a couple of days, the National Institutes of Health put out a statement and paper saying there's no evidence that it works. And frankly, it would be hard to believe it would work, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, when you have, for example, if you're exposed to measles, you're exposed to hepatitis A virus, you're exposed to rabies, you're exposed to a varicella, chickenpox virus. If you are given antibodies within a couple days of that exposure, you will prevent that disease. Clearly, antibodies work to prevent diseases. The question, do they treat viral diseases? And I think chickenpox story is the best story. If you give people who are exposed to chickenpox antibodies within 48 hours of being exposed, they won't get chickenpox. But if you wait 3 to 5 days, the data are much less clear that it works. So, and that's still during the incubation period of the disease, meaning get exposed to get symptoms. So that's evidence that it's unlikely that these antiviral antibodies would treat. Nonetheless, you have this press conference. My favorite part of that press conference, by the way, was when Donald Trump said, this is a breakthrough therapy. You know, and you're thinking, okay, maybe it'll win the Nobel Prize. In 1890, you know, we've been using since the days of diphtheria antisera. We've been doing this for a while. Not really a breakthrough. And so you see that. And then you hear just within the past couple of days, you know, Donald Trump said, when he heard that the emergency use authorization guidelines have now been extended to include a 2-month observation period for safety following the last dose, he realized that this means that there's no way there's going to be a vaccine, you know, before December or January at the earliest. And so he said he's going to, and I quote, bypass the FDA. Now, can he do that? He can. I mean, Alex Azar can basically say, I don't care what the FDA wants to do. I am going to approve this product through EUA. He can do that. Legally, he can do that. I don't think that's going to happen for one reason. The Data Safety Monitoring Board would have to say, okay, stop the trial. You know, and they're not going to do that. The Data Safety Monitoring Board has been charged with holding these vaccines to the same level of efficacy, the same standard of safety as any vaccine. That's their charge. That's why we're doing 30,000 or 30,000 plus persons trials, because that's a typical phase 3 trial. They're the only ones who know who's gotten vaccine and who hasn't. They're the only ones who know whether this is in any sense looking like it works or it doesn't. They're the only ones. I mean, when Donald Trump the other day, yesterday actually, said in a press conference, you know, this looks really good, the studies look really good. Unless he's on the Data Safety Monitoring Board, which he's not, he can't possibly know that. So I see them, the Data Safety Monitoring Board, as the group that stands in the way of just saying, look, let's just stop this trial and do it. Now, they could do that. They could say, we don't care what the phase 3 trials show. We have phase 1 data. We've shown that the vaccine is immunogenic. We've shown that, you know, that nobody died after 20 people got it. So let's give it to tens of millions of people. They could do that. I just think that the outcry would be so large and vast from people like Tony Fauci, from Dr. Collins, from everybody else who comments on this, that would get on the airways and say, I don't think we have data that shows this vaccine safe and works. I wouldn't get it. And I just think it works against the administration if you have a lot of people standing up and saying they wouldn't get it given the lack of data.
So the AstraZeneca trial was stopped in England for a while. They resumed, but it's still stopped in the United States. Why do you think, is that a good thing?
No idea. This is the
Okay.
problem with this. I mean, when you put a trial on clinical hold, which is the responsible thing to do, you do it because someone got a vaccine and had a serious adverse event. And when you put it on clinical hold, the public and the press will assume someone got a vaccine and had a serious adverse event. That's when it all starts to fall apart. Because what happens is, technically, neither the company nor the regulators can tell you the details of that case. They can't. It's confidential. So really, you can't know that case. And in a better world, we would know nothing. We would know nothing. I know this sounds awful because we want to be transparent, but either be transparent or don't be transparent, because if it's confidential, you can't know that story. Legally, you can't know that story. What ends up happening, though, is that the company, in a talk to shareholders, said there was a case of transverse myelitis, which then got picked up, obviously. And transverse myelitis is not trivial. It's inflammation of a segment of the spinal cord, which can cause, motor problems and sensory problems. It's not trivial, transverse myelitis. And then you find out it actually wasn't the first hold. It was a second hold. That the first hold, which apparently we never knew about, was in August. See, my feeling is like, either don't tell us there was a clinical hold, don't tell us, which is hard because there's so many investigators and that was going to have to leak out. Or when it's a clinical hold, then tell us the story. Tell us why it is that what were the studies that were done that made UK regulators feel that this was a coincidental and not causal association, that made them feel that they could move forward? Did they then revise the consent form to say that here's what we've seen in these cases, or not? And if they didn't, why? And if they did, why? And why is it the US federal regulators, i.e. the FDA, hasn't started that trial here, which would have been the fourth then, phase 3 trial in the United States? Why not? So we don't know these things. When I'm asked to comment on this, by like the national media, my answer is I can't comment on this because I don't know the facts. I just know what I've read in the newspaper, which, it may not be the story. I actually, have talked to a federal regulator in the United Kingdom and asked the question, could you give me the details on this? And the answer is no, can't do it. So it's frustrating.
Okay, so I'm going to go to some questions. We're going to do vaccine questions, then we're going to go over to general questions that people have.
All right, I'm not best with vaccines. I'll just be making stuff up when I do the general questions, but that's okay. People won't be able to tell, so we're good.
Okay, so this is kind of technical. Why is it not a problem that the transfection process is indiscriminate, that it is transfecting all human cells? And what is the status of monoclonal antibody therapies?
Well, I'm not sure. When you're injected with mRNA, messenger RNA, that messenger RNA will be taken up. It's in a complex lipid delivery system, whether it's Pfizer's product or Moderna's product. It'll then bind to cells, be taken up into cells. That complex lipid delivery system will essentially erode. And that gene then, the messenger RNA, will be in the cytoplasm. It will then enter the ribosomal pathway and be translated to a protein, which is specifically the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein, and then released from the cell. That's how that works. So it never enters the nucleus. So there's never going to be any incorporation of genetic material into the DNA. That's not going to happen with essentially messenger RNA. So I'm not sure what the concern is there, but that's not a problem. Regarding monoclonal antibodies, again, I think that monoclonal antibodies will certainly be of value in preventing infection. It's not an easy way to go. It's not cheap. You have to be inoculated intravenously with monoclonal antibodies, and they don't last for all that long. They last for months, but not longer than that. So you'd have to keep giving it. I think monoclonal antibodies would be of value for a person who is older with certain comorbidities, and we did not have a vaccine that worked in an older person. I think that's where monoclonal antibodies would probably be of value. But as it stands, you'd rather let the immune system develop its own active immunity rather than using a passive immunity pathway to get us out of this.
Okay, so I just want to, for the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. I know about 15 people have joined us since we started, so they probably didn't hear that announcement. So here's a question. Will the vaccines work as well in people whose immune systems are compromised, for example, people with lymphoma, as in other people?
Well, presumably not. I mean, if there's any, if one is receiving either biologicals or chemotherapies that suppress B and T cell responses, so your ability to make antibodies, then no. I don't think there would be a safety problem. I think what they would be is just an efficacy problem. So it really depends on to what extent your immune system is suppressed, how grave the level of immune suppression is to determine whether or not it would be a problem with efficacy.
So I think this is a similar question. I have a type of lymphoma and I take a medication to reduce the replication of my B cells. Do these factors make me more vulnerable to a serious COVID-19 infection compared with someone else my age, which is 69?
Which interestingly is my age. The
Okay.
answer is yes, it probably does. I think one of the ways that we rid ourselves of this virus is we make an antibody response to the virus. And that's so the degree to which you can't make an antibody response is the degree to which you would be more susceptible to continued viral replication and then, more severe and arguably longer term symptoms. So yes, that's a problem. So
Okay.
all the more, however, you're not helpless here. You are not helpless. We do have another way to prevent ourselves from getting infection. Wear masks, social distance, wash your hands, do the kinds of things that we're not doing in this country. This is the thing that's the most upsetting to me, actually. It's like there's two ways to get out of this pandemic, and we need both of those things. One, hygienic measures. I mean, look at other countries. Look at Germany, right? It's a similar country to ours. I mean, they last week had one day where they reported 11 deaths when we reported 1,100. We're not 100 times bigger than Germany. We're 5 times bigger than Germany. So why is it that we can't do what Germany does? The answer is because they're much better at having one federal leadership that says, look, I think we need to have a federal program for making sure everybody's masks and social distance. And they're just much smarter about this. So they get to go back to work faster. So they get to go back to school faster. Denmark does this. We can't do this because we have, frankly, an administration that disdains masking, as you see at these rallies when, the people are in indoor space, there's thousands of people, they don't wear a mask. I mean, what message is being sent there? It's being sent that we don't need to wear masks, and that's not true. If I was on service last week at Children's Hospital Philadelphia, and there's a lot of COVID-19 in our hospital. There's a lot of disease in our hospital. If you gave me the choice of either wearing a mask or getting a vaccine, I would choose the mask every time. I mean, if I can wear a mask, that's reasonably well fitting and maintain some level of social distance, from folks there, I think I'm not going to get infected. If I get a vaccine, let's say I get a vaccine that's very effective, which is to say 75% effective, which I think we'd all be happy with. That means 1 out of 4 people will get moderate to severe disease who are exposed. So the trick is, frankly, not to be exposed to the virus instead of being exposed and then hope that the vaccine works for you. So eventually we'll need both. And I think when we get a vaccine, I think we will get a vaccine by early next year. I hope that the message isn't great. I got a vaccine. I don't need to wear a mask. I don't need to social distance, in which case we would take a step back. We need both of those things. And that's got to be the message.
So here's a question. Why don't humans develop lasting immunity to the common cold? Is it possible that the same phenomenon would be the case with the coronavirus?
So interesting studies by Maurice Hilleman decades ago, where he was looking at making a common cold vaccine specifically to rhinovirus. He found that you can actually induce immunity to rhinovirus, a specific rhinovirus serotype, if you will, one type of the virus, for at least 4 years, which was the length of time that he studied it. The problem with the common cold is that there's 100 different serotypes and there of rhinovirus, and there are many other viruses that cause the common cold. That's the problem there. The question here is, how about coronavirus? I mean, there are 4 circulating strains of human coronavirus that have been around. They were first identified in the 60s. You can assume they were around well before that. They account for about 15 to 20% of the respiratory virus infections that we see come into our hospital every year. So if someone is infected with one of those 4 rhinovirus serotypes, how long are they protected from reinfection with that same serotype? Don't know. But there were studies done in the early 1990s where they took people who were infected with one serotype and then challenged them, human challenge studies, in adult volunteers with that same serotype, and found that they were protected. So it's at least a year. And I think that's key, because when we developed our rotavirus vaccine at Children's Hospital, the most important paper for us was a paper that was published in the early 1980s by Ruth Bishop in Australia, where she showed that if a baby gets rotavirus infection and then is challenged again with the virus later in life, they get much less severe disease. They get mild infection or asymptomatic reinfection instead of moderate to severe disease, which meant that that virus infection protected you against moderate to severe disease on reinfection. Great. That means you can make a vaccine. Because if you get infected again and again with that virus, or bacteria like strep throat or gonorrhea, which you get again and again, that's why you don't see vaccines against those. If natural infection doesn't protect, you're in trouble. So if you look at this virus, occasionally you'll hear the story of someone who gets infected twice, but the usual story is the second infection is much more mild. That's good. That's what you want. People get sort of panicked when they see that, but that's actually what you want. You just want to keep people out of the hospital and out of the morgue. That's the goal of this vaccine. And I think if natural infection can do that, then I think you can assume vaccine can do that.
So this is my question. In the last few years, forever, there's been a lot of people dying from the flu. Every year and my question is, should we have been wearing, in retrospect, should we have been wearing masks all this time?
Yeah, we should wear masks and social distance every winter. Yeah, good luck with that. You know, we have, look what's happened this year in Australia or in the southern hemisphere, which have flu seasons before ours. There's a dramatic reduction in flu in those two regions. Why? Because people are masking and social distancing. Last year in the United States, we had 780,000 hospitalizations from influenza, and we had about 60,000 people die. Watch what happens this year. It'll be dramatically less. So what will be the lesson? The lesson should be, you know, in the winter months, maybe we should mask and social distance. And you see that in Japan, for example, people tend to mask in the winter months. It's part of their culture. It would have to become part of our culture. And I don't see that happening. It would be great if it did, but I would be surprised. Maybe you'll start to see some people with masks more frequently, and people will be less quick to shake hands, less quick to hug. I think that'll certainly be true probably for a few years anyway.
So here we go. Will anti-vaxxers who refuse to get the vaccine once it's developed cause COVID-19 to risks to continue indefinitely? That's kind of depressing. Okay.
Yeah. So so the question is, what percentage of people will need to be vaccinated to stop the spread of this virus? Or said another way, to get the R0, the so-called contagiousness index, to less than 1, when now it's sort of between 2 to 3. It depends on the contagiousness of the virus, and it depends on the efficacy of the vaccine. There's actually a formula for this. If you assume that a vaccine is, say, 75% effective, you would need to vaccinate about 2/3 of the American population to stop spread, roughly. Now, there's a few caveats there. When you say 75% effective, what you're really saying is 75% effective against moderate to severe disease. That's the way this is going to be read out to the American public. But what you want is 75% effective against shedding, right? Because otherwise you're still contagious. However, there are still some other things that are working for you, which are masking and social distancing. That also has an effect, and natural immunity. I mean, the about 10% of this population or so, maybe a little less than that. So we figure 6 million cases, 60 million. It's probably at least 10% of the population has been infected with this virus. That provides some natural immunity. By the way, you never will get herd immunity from natural infection alone. It's never happened, and it will not happen here. So when Sweden sort of has this notion of, well, let's just let people get infected, we'll get enough natural immunity, and that will cause the virus to no longer spread. Never happened before. And if you want the best example of the virus for which it should happen, would be measles, right? I mean, if you're infected with measles, you are protected against measles for the rest of your life, forever. And you're protected completely. You are protected against moderate disease, severe disease, mild disease, and asymptomatic infection. You will not shed measles virus for the rest of your life. I mean, I am one of those people. I was infected when I was a little boy. So that's a great example, right? If that's true, wouldn't that be an example of a virus that should have basically burned itself out because everybody's infected is protected for the rest of their life? Not true. Every year there was about 1 to 2 million cases of measles. Every year there'd be 50,000 people hospitalized with measles, and every year there'd be 500 people who would die from measles. So this virus is never going to do that. I don't know whose idea that was in Sweden, but it wasn't a very good one.
Okay, so now that a couple of phase 3 trial protocols have been released, can you comment on the primary endpoints being measured and whether they're the best ones for assessing efficacy?
Yes, there was, and this may be a person that read that op-ed piece that was written by Peter Doshi and Eric Topol in the New York Times, decrying the way that these phase 3 trials are being set up. They felt that because it looks like what we're trying to do is prevent mild disease or maybe low moderate disease in these trials, that we're not really, and that was the title of the article, that we're not really looking at the right thing, that we want to really look at whether or not we're preventing severe disease. That's what we want to look at. But what I would say is that if you can prevent mild disease, you're going to prevent moderate to severe disease. I mean, you look at SARS natural infection. SARS natural infection will protect you against moderate to severe disease on challenge, but you can still get mild disease. And so if you can prevent mild disease, I think it's very likely you're going to prevent moderate to severe disease. So I don't agree with that premise. I think that the way that these trials are set up, we will learn a lot about whether these vaccines can protect.
So here's a question came in from email. If a vaccine is 80% effective, but 1 in 5,000 gets transverse myelitis, can there be limited approval, say all nursing home residents, all people over 60, and all healthcare workers? Is there a risk benefit for these people is great? I'm not sure I quite understand that, but I guess they're saying if you have a vaccine that's 80% effective, should it be given to the, even if there is, some transverse myelitis, is it worth giving it to nursing home residents and people over 60?
I think if you have a known serious side effect that causes permanent harm, that will kill that product. I don't think anybody will be willing to take the risk. I mean, people's understanding of risk is not great. We're pretty much innumerate in this country. If you tell them that it's possible that you could get this serious problem, and if it's 1 in 100, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, that's what they hear. I mean, the New York State Lottery sells millions of tickets every year for basically what is a 14 million to 1 shot with the phrase, "It could happen to you." And I think that's the way people would see this. I just think we're not very good at assigning risk. I mean, we're afraid of all the wrong things. We're afraid of flying in airplanes when we should be much more scared of driving to the airport. We don't know really where the real risks lie. We're bad at risk.
Okay, so this is my last question I'm going to ask about. Okay, so what do you make of the study this week in Science Translational Medicine on the increased levels of 1L-17A and IFN gamma in children infected with COVID-19? And what are the implications for school and daycare openings?
Well, I mean, it's when you're infected with SARS-CoV-2, you induce a panel of cytokines and chemokines, of which 2 you just mentioned. I think as time goes on, we're going to have a really good idea of which cytokines and chemokines are associated with so-called multi-inflammatory syndrome of children. And there's 2 different sort of ways that can present. It can present sort of as similar, it's got something called Kawasaki's disease. It can present as something similar to toxic shock syndrome. And then you have all these other things that virus can do, where it can cause a vasculitis, that can cause heart attacks, that can cause strokes, that can cause liver disease, that can cause kidney disease. And I think when you look at that Science Translational Medicine paper, we like sort of reductionist thinking, meaning to kind of get it down to just 1 or 2 things that are the cause. But as a general rule, it's a panoply of events, which is, I think, what's going to happen here. I mean, I know because I'm a pediatrician, that in the MISC children, the multi-inflammatory syndrome of children, syndrome in children, that we are starting to identify which cytokines they are. And interestingly, those cytokines and chemokines are different at some level than what we see in Kawasaki's disease. So, which is similar in that nobody knows what really triggers Kawasaki's. Here you have a virus that has triggered this. And I guess my answer is, I don't think that we're going to be able to say, okay, if this person produces interleukin 17 or a tumor necrosis factor beta or gamma interferon, that they can or can't go to school. I don't think that's going to be it. I do think that I think we should go back to school. Basically, I mean, answer the general question. I think we should do what Denmark did when they went back to school. Denmark went back to school. They had a great experience. They published that experience. The CDC picked that up, wrote a long document for how we can do that. Meaning, you know, don't put people on and crowd them on a school bus. Find a different way to get them to school and stagger it. Make sure that, you know, you can do your best in terms of social distancing. Make anybody over 3 years of age wear a mask. Make sure that the teachers are the one who switch rooms and not the students. Make sure that students eat at their desk instead of in a cafeteria. I mean, there was a lot of ideas for how to do it, which does cost, you know, some money, but at least gets us back to school, because we need to get back to school and we need to get back to work. I mean, we need to get back to school because on-site learning is much better than distant learning, because some people can't distance learn because they don't have computers at home, because for some children, it's the one decent meal they get during the day, that sometimes child abuse is only picked up in the school. And so I think, you know, it's a real loss. And this is part two of this pandemic, which is this loss of on-site schooling, and the other is loss of jobs, and the massive joblessness that leads to massive homelessness and food insecurity and mental problems and depression and suicide and domestic violence. I mean, that's part two of this pandemic. So we need to get back to work. And what bothers me is we're just so lazy about trying to do it in a smart way. We just want it to go away. We want to just engage in denialism. And certainly the administration helps us in trying to engage in denialism by just saying, you know, let's just ignore masks and ignore social distancing. It's just, let's forget about this. Let's pretend it's not there. That's not working. The denialism thing isn't working. So we need hard work and hard thinking. And instead what we get sort of denialism and magical thinking. Let's give hydroxychloroquine. Let's give convalescent plasma. Let's give extracts from oleander flowers. Let's give bleach. Let's give UV light. It's not going to work. Let's give a vaccine. And you know, there is nothing magical here. It's going to take hard work and hard thinking, and we're not doing it. And we're going to be living with this until we do it. The vaccines are not going to make this all go away. They aren't. We're going to have to continue to do hygienic measures and do them well in concert with vaccines if we want this to go away.
Okay. So I would like to hear about a possible second wave. Where and when will it occur, and what the research says about that?
I'm sorry. Are we past the first wave?
I don't think we are. But I'm asking you.
I think we're just in. I think Dr. Fauci just said that yesterday. He was asked that question. He said, "I think it's probably better to say what we're about to be challenged with in the fall and winter." He wouldn't say second wave because we're still in the first wave. We've never gotten past this. It's not like the flu pandemic 100 years ago, when there really was a cessation of the virus and then it sort of came back again. That truly was the first and second wave. That's not this.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you. Okay, so are you taking public transportation or are you driving?
That's a very good question. And when I'm on service, so right now I'm in Avalon, New Jersey, in a shore house in Avalon, New Jersey with my family. But when I'm on service, I go back to Philadelphia and I live about 2.5 miles from the hospital. Normally I take the bus to work. I don't have a car, so I take the bus to work and love it. I love taking the bus to work. But now the question is, do I want to get a bus? I want a bus in Philadelphia. And for at least last week when I was on service, I took an Uber to and from work. I admit it, that's what I did. I was still nervous about the bus. But next time when I'm on service, which is going to be about 2 weeks from now, I'm probably going to try getting on the bus. I mean, I look at the bus when it passes me to see like how many people are wearing masks. And I've occasionally seen that we're like, no one's wearing a mask. And it just worries me. So, which is ridiculous, because now I spend like $100 a week just to get to and from work. Whereas previously I got to work for free because I'm of an age where I can ride the bus in Philadelphia for free.
Well, the buses in New York, you can open the windows on some of them, which help. I think, you rationalize in your mind, but the New York City subways claim that they're cleaner than ever and they circulate air and replace it faster than hospitals.
Everybody's wearing masks and stuff. Are they good about masks?
Yeah, and they're not. And on Monday they started fining people if they didn't wear a mask. Because
that's great. That's great.
Because what's happened is that there was such an increase in traffic because everybody's driving to work and driving in, that I have never seen so much traffic on the FDR Drive, which is on the Upper East Side. And there's so much traffic now because everyone is driving in single cars very inefficiently, driving by themselves and going to work. And the highways are just mobbed. So, so that Governor Cuomo said the fines are an effort to, there was 95% compliance without fines, but now that he wants to, fine people $50 if you're not wearing a mask, and there's no appeal, that's it. Buses, it is, but people are afraid to be the mask police, because I once said to someone, hey, maybe you could wear a mask, and he just like started screaming at me. So I said, okay, I'm not gonna be the mask police.
What was his, he screamed at you? What was his point of view?
He was just screaming at me like he's gonna knock the hell out of me. So I just said, okay, I'm getting off, which is a good thing about a bus. So do you eat outside?
Yes. Well, I eat at a restaurant outside. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. We've eaten at restaurants here in Avalon outside with my family.
Okay. So New York City just announced they're going to have open dining year round. I'm not sure how that will work, but a day like today, it's 80 degrees. It's easy to do. So would you eat indoors?
So I did eat indoors the other day at a place about a mile from here, and I wasn't going to eat. My family really wanted to do that. They're all young and healthy, and they're, I'm older, but they, I was not going to eat unless the tables were all at least 6 feet apart, and they were, and we were sort of in a corner where it was just us, and there was a table about 6 feet away, so I felt comfortable doing that. If it was closer, I wouldn't have done it. And in fact, they want to go out to dinner tonight, so I'm going to again have the option to not go if the tables aren't far enough apart.
So one of the ideas for eating outside is to build pods. And then a friend of mine, as a doctor, said, well, will the air circulate enough? And I said, I don't know. I'll ask you. So will pods be enough? Because then you could be in it. Someone else could come out of it who had the virus, and they're spreading it all over the place. So is that a good idea, or should just be like,
the pods have how many people is it per pod?
4 people, maybe?
Just your little group. Your little group.
Yeah, your little group, yeah.
Like something out of the Jetsons.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, again, when I walk into the restaurant, I put on a mask. When I sit down at the table then and I'm far away, I take off the mask. So I guess if the pod came up or whatever, however it works, like in the Jetsons, then I would put the mask back on. If I put the mask on when I walk in and out of the restaurant, I wouldn't, because you're walking past people.
Okay. So thoughts on aerosol transmission? That would imply indoor distances of more than 6 feet.
Well, it's so let me explain aerosol transmission. So the difference between what was the major form of transmission of this virus, which is small droplet, and aerosolized, is that the aerosolized particle is much smaller, less than 5 microns in size. So it can hang in the air. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't just, if when I talk and have small droplets come from my mouth, when I sneeze or cough, it travels, but it really doesn't travel more than 6 feet, and usually just settles down. And that's why in humid climates, during the summer, these viruses are much less contagious, and that's the main reason they go away. Is that in a humid climate, that small droplet accretes water, acquires water, it then drops much more quickly. Aerosols aren't like that. aerosols just hang in the air like a ghost. So, and measles is spread by aerosolization, and so that it has. If you look at the R0, the contagiousness index of measles, and compare it to the contagiousness index of SARS-CoV-2, it's 10 times greater for measles. Measles has an R0 of 18. This virus is closer to 2. And by R0, what I mean is that if I have SARS-CoV-2 and I walk outside during my normal day and just go about my normal activity, and not wearing a mask, nobody else is wearing a mask, I'll infect 2 people or 2 to 3 people. With measles, it's 18. When somebody comes into our hospital with measles and they go into like one of the treatment rooms in the emergency department, nobody can go in that room for the next 2 hours. You have to wait for those little aerosolized droplets to fade. To me, the best example is measles. There was a publication in the New England Journal of Medicine of an outbreak in Indiana, where, as part of a church group, a 17-year-old unvaccinated girl goes to Romania, where she visits a hospital, she visits an orphanage, and then unknown to her, she proceeds to acquire measles. She gets on a plane, she comes home. She's contagious. She's shedding virus, although she actually doesn't have the rash yet, because you shed virus actually about a day or 2 before you develop the rash. She goes to a church group of 500 people. In that church group of 500 people, there were 39 people who had either not been naturally infected or not been, no, 35, sorry. There were 35 people who either hadn't been naturally infected or hadn't been vaccinated. And then the other, whatever, 465 people had been naturally infected or vaccinated. So they were going to be protected. Of those 35 people who hadn't been naturally infected or vaccinated, 31 got sick. 31 of 500. Now, she didn't see all those people. I mean, she obviously didn't come in contact with all 35 people who were sick. What happened was, though, was that at some point they came into her airspace. I mean, if I have measles and I stand here and then I leave, anybody who comes into my airspace within 2 hours of that is at risk of getting measles. That's aerosolization spread. That's not this virus. Although I think there is a component to that. You know, when you hear like a choir gets together and one person is sick and like 35 people get sick, I think there is a component to aerosolization. But I think in terms of like housing and the you know, whether in terms of how air circulates, I think for the most part, it's not an important component for this virus, but it is an occasional component. Because if it was an important component, you would see R naughts closer to measles, which you don't.
Several years ago, there was a warning from the Metropolitan Museum of Art that if you visited them in the last 3 days, because there was several cases of measles, and so that's a long time. You know, if you in the last 3 days, does it hang around 3 days?
No.
No. Okay. So they're being careful. So have you been to a museum yet?
No, and I'm actually on the board of trustees of the Franklin Institute, which is a museum. So I need to get there, but I haven't been yet. But they've opened. They've opened, and they have a lot of space there, and they're very, very careful about all this. So they haven't had a problem yet.
Well, I went to the Metropolitan Museum, and you have to make a reservation. They check your temperature when you go in, and it's timed admission. And I went to the Temple of Dendor, which is a very large space, and I was the only person there except for a security guard. So they also have closed off small galleries where you can't social distance. So I felt pretty safe there and pretty protected. Some of the other museums are open, Museum of Modern Art and a few others, which I think is a good thing, you know, so because people need to do something. Here's a question: does using a disinfectant spray such as Lysol help deactivate or disable aerolized virus droplets hanging in the air or on surfaces?
Well, maybe on surfaces. I mean, I mean, it's an envelope virus, so it's going to be susceptible to any sort of detergent treatment. But I think spraying the air probably isn't going to do it. Maybe if you were in a protective bubble, that would work.
So here's my question. So this virus, if you can wash your hands for the length of singing happy birthday, it's not the strongest virus in the world, but it sure is very deadly if you get it. So,
you know, I think what surprised people about this virus is they assumed coming out of China, this was a respiratory virus, and the analogies were always made to flu. This isn't flu. I mean, it causes vasculitis, which flu doesn't do. It causes this multi-inflammatory syndrome in children, which flu doesn't do. It really has a preferential mortality for nursing homes. I mean, more than 40% of the deaths were in nursing homes, whereas with flu, it's less than 10%. And it rages during the summer, which flu doesn't do. So it's not flu. It's just a weird virus, which we were about, by the way, to try and conquer with a series of vaccines like messenger RNA or replication defective simian adenoviruses or replication defective human adenoviruses or DNA, with which we have no commercial experience. So none. I mean, those strategies are not used to make vaccines in the United States. It's not like, you know, inactivating the virus or attenuating the virus or using a purified protein with which we have abundant experience. We're going to use strategies initially with which we have no commercial experience to fight a virus that has already had a series of clinical and pathological observations that are shocking. So do I think there's going to be a learning curve here? Yeah, I think we're going to learn things over the next 2 years we wish we knew now, but that's always true in medicine. No breakthrough comes without some level of human costs.
So I live in an apartment building with a central HVAC system and windows that don't open. How much do I need to worry about catching COVID from my neighbors? There are 35 units in the building. The people never wear masks or socially distance in common areas.
Well, that's why you should worry. I mean, not so much because of the airflow. I think just the fact that nobody wears masks or social distances, that's a problem. That's just weird. And this is in New York?
I'm not sure where that person is, Okay, so I know that like central air conditioning people are worried about. What about? I mean, I live in a building that has steam heat, and that comes from the entire building. But I think that's okay because that's everyone is an individual unit.
Yeah, I don't think, I think the big thing is when you come in contact with someone who's infected.
Okay.
But again, if you're wearing a mask and standing 6 feet away, and they're wearing a mask and standing 6 feet away, you're not going to get infected. For the most part, you're not going to get infected. It's not perfect, but it's darn close. Much better than a vaccine's going to be.
So what if you're wearing a mask and someone isn't wearing a mask?
Yeah, well, then that increases the risk.
Increases. Okay. Does alcohol kill the virus on surfaces? I'm thinking of rubbing alcohol 70% or greater concentration.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that. What the physical chemical characteristics. This is an envelope virus. As a general rule, those viruses aren't terribly hardy. I mean, I thought when this virus started, where did you hear about it? You heard about it in nursing homes and cruise ships. And so I thought this was going to be like norovirus, meaning there was going to be an enteric component, an intestinal component, and that surfaces were going to be really important, that washing hands were going to be really important. But that's probably not true. I think it's really the respiratory route is far and away more important.
What are the greatest advances in potential treatments? I'm in a South American country with low hospital capacity that is still using lockdown as the main preventive measure.
I'm sorry, in the part of that, what was the first part of that question?
What are the greatest advances in potential treatments for COVID-19?
Treatments. So what do you have? You have remdesivir, which is an antiviral agent. It's a transcriptional inhibitor, and right. It's not a wonder drug. It shortens the length of illness by about 4 days. But again, it doesn't appear to necessarily keep you from dying. So that's weak. There's some things around the corner. There's a monoclonal antibody directed against a surface protein called CCR5, which is on helper T cells, that is really the HIV binding protein. So that was developed as an anti-HIV drug, anti-AIDS drug. But what they found is that it actually has some benefit in people who have COVID-19, because what it does is it sort of shuts down the production of these cytokines and chemokines that we talked about earlier, which clearly is at the heart of the pathogenesis of this illness. So that may be a value. We'll see that that's moving along. Certainly the data initially look good, but I don't, as a general rule, the best way to deal with viruses is to prevent them. Once they've already started to reproduce themselves in you, it's the treatments are never wonder drugs.
So, one of my friends has a little podcast, and he says that he hopes that there's a rapid COVID-19 test that you can have. So if you start getting flu symptoms or cold symptoms, which people do get more often in the winter, a rapid test, which may not be as accurate as the nasal swab test, but do you ever see that coming?
Right, rapid. What body fluid are you testing?
I don't know. I mean,
there's
just
saliva test.
Saliva test, yeah.
It's a test. I mean, I think, to be honest with you, and this is going to be not something that the public health community necessarily embraces, but I just don't think we're going to test our way out of this pandemic. Not in this country. I think that South Korea, the testing and quarantining and isolation worked. It was just a population which you could do that. That's not going to be this population. So I think what you should do is you should assume everyone you come in contact with is asymptomatically shedding, because we don't test most people who are asymptomatic, right? And so therefore the testing is haphazard and sporadic, and you know about people who are infected, but there are probably a lot of people out there who are infected that you don't know about. I mean, we've reported 6 million cases, but when you look, or a little more than 6 million cases now, but if you look at the antibody testing, it's probably 10 times that of the number of people who've actually been infected. So we're not identifying, 15% of the cases. We're just identifying about 10% of the cases. So assume that there are people that, it just makes much more sense to me to assume that everybody you come in contact with who you don't know is infected, and that you should wear a mask and that they should wear a mask, because testing, I just think, is not our best way out of this, not in this country.
I mean, in New York City, they're pushing everyone to get tested. Do you agree with that?
No.
Okay.
Okay. But again, I think I can understand where the governor of New York would have that as a stance. But when he asked for that, remember that most people won't get tested.
Okay, so do you have any guidance or I guess prediction for when we can do the human thing and hug people we love but don't live with? So what?
The human thing. Yeah, I don't know. I think we're going to be living with this for a couple of years, if not longer. And then it's going to be a matter of when we become comfortable with the level of infection and the level of death that we have. I think that, you know, if the goal is to see no more infections and no more deaths, that's going to be a long time. But so I think, I mean, we seem to be comfortable with flu. I mean, we were comfortable with the fact that 60,000 people died of flu last year. And remember, you know, there was a flu vaccine, and about probably 50 to 60% of people who should get the flu vaccine, which is basically everybody over 6 months of age, actually gets it. And it does provide, you know, 50% of protection against moderate to severe disease, which is at least something. But people do get the flu vaccine and die from flu. And that will also be true here. So, which is, again, I just want to make this point that you, even if you get the vaccine, you're going to need to protect yourself and hope that others around you are helping to protect you, because no vaccine is 100% effective. Even the measles vaccine, which is great, the world's best vaccine. I mean, 2 doses of measles vaccine gives you 97% protection for the rest of your life, but that's still 3% of people who aren't protected.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that Walgreens and CVS, that people are really wanting to get flu shots. I've never seen it like this. You have to make an appointment to do that. I see 8 people sitting down waiting for their flu shot. So to me, that's an encouraging sign.
That's great.
Yeah. So the government keeps saying we should get flu shots. It's more important this year than any year. And is that because not to confuse ourselves with COVID-19?
Yeah, I mean, the term that's used is twindemic, you know, because it's typically, these kinds of viruses are typically winter respiratory viruses. There's a fear, reasonably, that as the fall and winter approaches, this virus will rage more, although it never really seemed to stop even over the summer. We never had a vacation from this virus. But if you know, last year, you know, flu generally rages December, January, February, starts to sort of taper off March, April. COVID didn't really start to kill people till the beginning of March. So these were sequential infections last year. This year, they're likely to be concordant infections, concomitant infections. And so that will be a much greater burden on the healthcare system than it was last year. And last year was obviously a huge burden on the healthcare system, but those were sequential infections. We had 780,000 hospitalizations from flu last year. This year, I do think we're going to have far less from flu. One, because I think you're right, people are better at getting vaccinated, and two, because of the, you know, the masking and distancing that we're doing.
So what about gyms? Gyms are starting to reopen, but they can't have classes. Do you think that's a good idea?
Again, it's just a matter of masking when you can and distancing when you can, just being smart about it. I mean, just don't ignore it. Don't deny it. Don't say, okay, I'm just going to go back over my normal life and realize that everything's going to be okay. I mean, it worries me when, you know, like the World Series now is going to be played in Texas. And you know, Rob Manfred, who's the commissioner of Major League Baseball, wants to have fans. I mean, does he really want to? He doesn't want to fill the stadium, I hope, because that would be a really bad idea. I mean, Texas isn't exactly free of this virus. It just worries me. We want to go back, but we really can't go back until we pay the price. It's pay me now, pay me later. Other countries have been willing to pay now so that they can go back to work and go back to school. We're not. We just keep hoping this will go away more magically.
Well, the US Open tennis seemed to work. I mean, no, it went on, they finished it and all that kind of stuff. The French Open, they're a little worried because they're going to have fans and they keep cutting the number of fans. Okay, so here's Gwen. What month should I get the flu vaccine? I already got mine. So
well, typically September, October. I mean, you could make the argument. I mean, the person who, and this is not a public health recommendation. This is not my recommendation. I'm just telling you that the person who is the senior editor of the definitive book on vaccines called Plotkin's Vaccine, Stan Plotkin, who's the developer one of the developers of the rotavirus vaccine, the developer of the rubella vaccine. It's a brilliant man. He actually gets 2 doses. He gets one around September, then he gets another one around sort of December, January, because there is some fading of immunity. As you move into the season really starts to peak around December, January, February. So you could argue you get it in December, it may have more of a fading, especially as an older person. And so to get the second dose. So he always gets 2 doses.
Is there there's not a 2-dose flu vaccine?
No, there's not.
So he's just getting, he's like
doing it off label.
He's like voting twice, basically. Okay. All right. Do you advocate to, you know?
No, I don't. I advocate getting the vaccine in September, October. Our hospital actually insists that you get everybody be vaccinated by September 30th.
Okay. What do you think of the long COVID phenomenon? And do you think people will eventually recover?
Well, I think it's real. This virus does cause vasculitis, and therefore it can cause, because every organ of your body has a blood supply, therefore every organ can be affected. And then there's I think it's a number of things. I think also it's ICU psychosis for people that were in the hospital for a while. I think when you're sick for a while, it really takes that. So there's fatigue and depression and all the symptoms that are associated with depression. So I think there are a lot of things that go into that. But it's certainly a real phenomenon.
So what question do you get asked the most by people?
I guess the most common question I get asked is, when do I think there'll be a vaccine, and how successful do I think it'll be?
Okay. So someone says, if and when I get the vaccine, will I need to get my antibody status checked?
No,
No. Okay.
because it won't tell you anything. I mean, we're not at the point where we can say, if you have this level of antibodies, you know that you're going to be protected. You don't know that. I mean, the whole notion of an antibody passport was just wrong. That's not, or even a vaccine passport is wrong, because it's not going to be 100% effective. And actually the antibodies that we measured when the typical antibody tests are just binding antibodies. You really care about is neutralizing antibodies. We're going to find whether or not, when we do these phase 3 trials, whether there really is a level of neutralizing antibodies that's protective. We don't know that yet.
If musicians are performing outside and singing, is it safe if the audience is at least 6 feet away?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe Paul McCartney will do a free concert. That'll be great. Okay, last chance for any other questions. No open questions, and so we're going to let you go because you have a lot to do. Tomorrow you're going to be on Good Morning America.
I am supposedly going to be in Good Morning America. I think they it's like at the beginning, just like, so it starts at 8, but you actually have to film at 7, which means you have to be on get on their thing at 6:45, which is ridiculous, but that's the way it works. But that's show business. There's no business like it. Like no business I know.
Okay.
That was for those older people who remember Ethel Merman.